In this video, I'm going to take you through the basics of controlling a vehicle, a hovercraft, either with the two props or with the servo. The two props one is a little bit simpler than the servo. The servo, there's a little more to talk about, so if you're doing a servo, be sure to watch that. The basic idea, I'm using just the code lab6b, which is posted on the Canvas site. And what lab6b is, as you can see here, is we're simply taking the air. The air is our target rotation, which is set to 0. We can set it to whatever we want, but right now it's set to 0. We take our desired rotational speed and we subtract the measured speed. So the measured speed in degrees per second is recorded from the Z gyro. And so we take the air and then we multiply it by some coefficient Kp for proportional gain. And then we use that value, that coefficient times the air, to create this differential drive. And then the two motors, which are set to motor 2 and 3, one of them we drive forward with that half of that magnitude, and the other we drive backwards with half of that magnitude. And the idea here is if we have our hovercraft with our two props on the side, and this thing is spinning here at 10 degrees per second, it's upside down, I guess. Well, it's hard for me not to do that upside down. So if it's spinning that way at 10 degrees per second, we're going to go, in this case, our coefficient is 10. So we're going to do 10 times 10, our coefficient, equals 100. And then we're going to drive, to correct this, we're going to drive this motor forward by half of that, and this motor backwards by half of that. And if I have something I can erase this with, hold on. And so the idea is that should correct our speed. The problem you'll find is with these motors, driving with a fairly small value doesn't even really turn them on. So it takes a certain amount of current before they'll even get moving. So we'll probably have to increase the gain. So I already have this code programmed on the hovercraft, so I'm just going to run it, and we're going to take a look at what it does. So you can see it does start to fight the spin. Once it spins fast enough to kind of start those motors turning on, it does eventually fight the spin, but it's not really powerful, and it's still spinning wildly. So the first thing we'd probably want to do is try increasing the gain. So let's go from a gain of 10 to a gain of 100. And then I'm going to upload this . So while this is uploading, so now that our gain is 100, if we have a hovercraft here, oops, wrong marker. This is the right one. So now if we have a hovercraft, and if we're spinning here at 10 degrees per second, now we're going to do 10 times 100. Is 1,000, and we're going to take half of that and drive that one that way, and the other half, oops, sorry. The other half is going to drive that one that way. Sorry, the light's kind of blocking what I wrote. So now that the gain is much higher, we should get a much bigger response out of the motors due to that change. But let's take a peek. I think my upload messed up because that looked the same as before. All right, there we go. Now that was a proper upload. So now let's try it. So it's much better response now because we got a much better response because now all it takes is, maybe 5 degrees per second before there's enough of a signal to drive those motors and get them fighting back against it. So let's just go crazy. What if we increase this gain all the way to 1,000? Let's see what happens now. And I haven't tried this, so I don't know what happens. If it works out perfectly, it'll be a little embarrassing for me. Okay, so now this is with a gain of 1,000. Yeah. Okay, that was a problem. So you can see what happens when the gain gets too high. It kind of shot itself forward. Probably because the motors are stronger driving forward than backwards, so they're not really balanced. And it was kind of oscillating back and forth. You could see it going. That's it sort of overcorrecting itself. It still wasn't bad, but because it was driving at such a strong signal on and off, it kind of pulled itself forward while trying to correct itself. So let's scale this back a little bit. Let's see what happens at 400. We know 1,000 is too high. Okay, so that was probably still also a little bit too high. So let's scale this back to 200. It was still kind of, when you touch it, it would kind of jerk and sort of fly forward, and I could really feel it aggressively fighting any change in motion. Let's go back, let's go down to 200. But it was okay at 400, I guess. And we're going to test, you know, whatever our proportional gain is set to, we're going to kind of bump it around and see how it responds and see if it's a fairly reasonably controlled and responds to disturbances okay. Okay. That was pretty good. It might still be a little bit too high. Maybe we'll scale it back a little bit to like 150. But you notice what happened as it was going is it was still kind of slowly rotating. And especially if we're trying to drive this thing forward, we really don't want that. So even though our proportional gain now, we scaled it back to the point that it's fairly well controlled, we still have an issue in that it's still rotating. We still have an offset error. And that's because to hold itself steady, it needs to be driving one motor forward and the other motor backwards, always. And in order to get that signal to constantly drive those, it needs to have some error. So the way we'd fix that is by adding an integral gain term. So let's do that. Let's add an integral gain term. So I'm going to do some integral gain, and let's just make it something small. We'll just make it like 2, something like that. And I'm also going to create a variable So I'm also going to create a variable to store the integral. So if we're integrating the error, every time through the loop, whatever extra error we have to add that to some accumulated value to get the integral. So I'm creating a variable integrated error to hold that, and then we'll go down here and we will add a term that says so we're going to add the plus equals in C means take the value and add something else to it. So we're going to take integrated error and we're going to add to the value that was stored in it, whatever we put on the other side of this expression, which in this case is going to have to be the little slice of the integral that we got during this time step. So right now my code is a time step of 40 milliseconds. So the integrated error is going to be the magnitude of the error. Well, we already have the magnitude of the error down here. And then it's going to be that times the time step. So in this case, it's 40 milliseconds, so we have to do 0.040 seconds. So now every 40 milliseconds when we go through here, it's going to take the error, multiply it by 40 milliseconds, and add that to that integrated error value. And now what we can do is, instead of driving just with the proportional gain times the air, now we can also drive with the integrated air times the integrated air coefficient, which in this case is Ki. That was the value Ki I created up here. So let's see what happens when we add that integrated air term. Okay, that was better. You can see it's it did still rotate a little bit, but it rotated a lot slower over time. See, right off the bat, it rotates pretty quickly. But eventually that integral starts building up, and when the integral builds up, and you can watch it happen, so now it basically has canceled itself out. Okay. But that cancellation happened much too slowly, so let's increase the integral error and see what happens. Let's just go up to 100 and see what happens. Okay, that was much better. You can see it pretty much immediately gets itself all straightened out. Um, but it was kind of wobbling a little bit, so maybe we'll scale this back a little bit. Let's just try, we only really tried a small value. Let's just try 30 for the integral error. Okay, that was pretty good. You can see it kind of fixing itself. One thing you'll notice is if you spin it, because it's doing an integral error, if you spin it, it will return to the original position as best it can. We still had a little bit of rotation that could just be error in the gyroscopic sensor or something like that. But that was pretty good. That's pretty close to what I would consider good control. Now we could add derivative control. I'm not going to do it in this video, but when you bump it, you'd see when you bump it, it would you'd bump it and then it would kind of slowly return. That's because that integral of the bump was a pretty big error that it was integrating for a while, but then it kind of slowly uses that integral gain to compensate for it. We could increase the integral gain, which could make us go kind of wobble again, or we could fix that with proportional gain. So what proportional gain would do is when we first had that bump, it would immediately fight against that bump, and that would prevent that integral from ever growing. So we can add that. If we're trying to add derivative gain, we're going to have to add a couple of other variables. We're going to have to remember the previous error value, and so we're going to have to keep track of the previous error, and then we're going to have to keep track of the current error, or we measure the current error, and then multiply it by some derivative value. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to skip that for this video. The next video is going to be adding control for a prop on a servo.